June 1942. In Detroit, the smell of oil, steel, and paint filled the vast halls of the Chrysler tank arsenal. Conveyor belts moved with a rhythm that seemed impossible to the German mind, a rhythm that turned raw steel into combat vehicles in less than an hour. Workers in overalls guided hulls and turrets down the line as sparks rained from welders. By the end of a single shift, dozens of Sherman tanks rolled out, engines already roaring, ready to be shipped thousands of miles away. This was America's hidden arsenal, and it was unlike anything the German command had imagined. In Germany, tanks were the product of craft. The Tiger I required 300,000 man-hours to build. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering, carefully assembled, individually adjusted. In Detroit, tanks were not masterpieces. They were mass-produced instruments of war, stamped from assembly lines that had once built automobiles. A Tiger was elegant, but slow to produce. A Sherman was simple, reliable, and by the thousands. By 1943, American industry was producing nearly 2,000 Shermans a month. German intelligence officers, combing through intercepted radio reports and merchant shipping manifests, dismissed the figures as exaggeration, a fantasy designed to frighten them. A colonel in the Abwehr scribbled in his report, "No nation at war can sustain such output. This is deception." Yet the numbers were real. In factories across Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois, hundreds of thousands of workers, many of them women who had never before entered heavy industry, kept the lines running day and night. Posters in the arsenal of democracy declared, "The job is never done until the last tank rolls out," and the tanks kept rolling. American logistics made the miracle possible. Liberty ships slipped out of New York Harbor under the cover of night, loaded with tanks lashed to their decks and secured in their holds. Convoys stretched across the Atlantic, guarded by destroyers, corvettes, and aircraft. German U-boats prowled the shipping lanes, sinking vessels by the dozens, yet the stream never stopped. For every ship sunk, 3 more left port. By 1944, American shipyards were producing a Liberty ship in less than 5 days. It was a mathematical equation the German Kriegsmarine could not solve. Submarines could not sink them fast enough. By the time the Allies prepared for the liberation of Europe, more than 150,000 vehicles, tanks, trucks, half-tracks, jeeps had crossed the ocean. German spies in occupied France sent urgent cables. The enemy is moving vehicles through the countryside by the tens of thousands. Roads are choked with columns. Their reserves appear inexhaustible. German generals at OKW headquarters refused to believe the scale. Field Marshal von Rundstedt scowled at the reports. "Propaganda," he muttered. "We would see evidence if it were true." Evidence would arrive soon enough. What German intelligence had failed to grasp was the secrecy of Allied logistics. Convoys sailed under radio silence. Camouflage nets draped over vehicles in English fields concealed their numbers. The Americans even built entire dummy depots, inflating rubber tanks and erecting wooden trucks to confuse aerial reconnaissance. To German photo interpreters, the images looked absurd, too theatrical to be serious. They never understood that the fakes were hiding something far larger, real stockpiles hidden just a few miles away. American officers understood that surprise lay not only in where the blow would fall, but in how overwhelming it would appear when it landed. German doctrine had been built on qualitative superiority. The Tiger tank, with its 80mm gun, could destroy a Sherman at 2 kilometers. The Panther, with its sloped armor, was feared even by Allied crews. But the production numbers told a different story. Germany built 347 Tigers in the entire war. America built over 49,000 Shermans. For every Tiger, 37 Shermans. For every Panther, 15 Shermans. The mathematics of war were shifting. General Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg, once said, "Quantity has a quality of its own." By 1944, he would see that maxim turned against him. Rumors began to reach German officers from the Eastern Front. Captured Soviet reports spoke of trains arriving from Murmansk, carrying Shermans marked with white stars. Stalin himself admitted to his generals, "These American tanks are not the best, but they are many, and they arrive quickly." The Wehrmacht dismissed it. Surely the Soviets exaggerated, using propaganda to comfort their troops. Yet prisoners confirmed the stories. By 1943, over 4,000 Shermans had already been delivered to the Red Army. They rolled through the snows of Kursk, fighting alongside T-34s in the greatest tank battle in history. For German panzer commanders, it was the first taste of what would later arrive in the West. Back in occupied France, officers of the 21st Panzer Division conducted training maneuvers near Caen. Major Rudolf von Rosen recorded in his diary, "We are told the Americans intend to invade, but how can they land tanks in such numbers? The channel is narrow but treacherous. Our artillery will smash them in the surf." His words captured the German mindset confidence that geography and firepower would make an American invasion impossible. They had not seen the convoys in Liverpool, the fields of southern England packed with Shermans awaiting the signal. They had not understood the scale of Allied preparation. What was invisible to German eyes was the greatest logistical operation in history. The invisible stream grew month by month. By May 1944, British roads were clogged with vehicles. In the weeks before D-Day, more than 93,000 American vehicles were staged for the assault. Aerial reconnaissance captured glimpses of endless rows of tanks under camouflage nets. Still, German analysts convinced themselves that much of it was decoys. The deception worked because the reality seemed unbelievable. German officers had been trained in an era when industrial production was measured in hundreds, not tens of thousands. They did not grasp that America had retooled its entire economy for war. Automakers who once produced Buicks and Fords were now building Shermans. Sewing machine factories produced gun parts. Typewriter companies produced machine guns. The nation's GDP had doubled in 4 years. Every statistic pointed to a juggernaut, but to the German eye, it was fantasy. A Tiger was worth 10 Shermans, they told themselves. But what if the battlefield held not 10 Shermans, but 100? German soldiers whispered rumors from letters sent home by comrades on the Eastern Front, stories of entire battalions of Shermans charging Soviet lines, of American tanks climbing hills in columns so long that artillery batteries could not shell them all. One sergeant scoffed, "These are fairy tales. The Americans are soft. They will never fight like Germans." Yet he did not know that in Detroit, another Sherman was rolling off the line every hour, bound for Europe. In Berlin, Joseph Goebbels crafted speeches ridiculing American materialism. He insisted their industry produced only fragile machines, incapable of standing against German craftsmanship. Yet, secretly, he worried. Reports from the front confirmed what propaganda denied. German mechanics captured in North Africa inspected knocked-out Shermans and were stunned by their simplicity. Parts could be replaced in minutes, engines swapped in hours. A Tiger immobilized by a mechanical fault often never returned to battle. A Sherman was repaired, refueled, and sent back into the fight by nightfall. In the darkened rooms of the Reich Chancellery, the first seeds of fear took root. What if America truly could drown them in steel? What if the war would not be decided by the brilliance of German design, but by the relentless tide of American production? They would not have long to wait for the answer. June 6, 1944. Dawn broke over the beaches of Normandy, and with it came the thunder of the largest amphibious invasion in history. Among the endless landing craft, pressed against the rising tide, were steel silhouettes that would change the face of European battlefields forever. The first Shermans clattered down ramps into the surf, some sinking instantly beneath the waves, others clawing their way to sand with engines roaring. German soldiers of the 302nd Infantry Division, peering through their bunkers above Omaha Beach, could hardly believe what they were seeing. In training, they had been told American armor would be too heavy to land under fire, too fragile to survive the channel crossing. Yet here, through the smoke and blood of D-Day, Shermans appeared in waves, climbing dunes, pushing inland, their white stars painted bright against olive-drab steel. By nightfall, more than 400 Shermans had reached Normandy. Within days, thousands would follow. For German officers stationed near Caen, the invasion report sounded like a nightmare written in numbers. They had prepared to repel a limited landing, a strike force of perhaps a few divisions. What they encountered was an avalanche. The Allies brought ashore not only infantry, but a mechanized army, 5,000 tanks and vehicles in the first week alone. Shermans rolled off landing ships, were craned directly onto makeshift piers, or drove through the new artificial harbors constructed by British engineers at Arromanches. To the German eye, it was industrial magic. A lieutenant of the 12th SS Panzer Division later wrote, "We believed no one could move heavy armor across the Channel in such quantities. On June 8th, we realized we were wrong. The roads behind the beaches swarmed with tanks. Every hedgerow concealed another column." The shock deepened during the battles that followed. In the Bocage country of Normandy, Panthers and Tigers ambushed advancing Shermans from hidden positions. The German guns tore through their armor, and American tank crews paid dearly. At Villers-Bocage, Michael Wittmann's Tiger destroyed an entire column in minutes. German soldiers cheered, believing such dominance proved their superiority. But the following day, new columns appeared, longer and denser than before. For every Sherman knocked out, another seemed to arrive from the beaches. German officers began to note a disturbing pattern. Victories felt hollow, temporary, erased by the endless stream of replacements. Oberst Hermann Meyer scribbled in his diary, "We destroy them, and yet they return. It is as if the earth itself grows tanks." By mid-July, Allied forces massed for Operation Goodwood, the largest tank assault the British Army would ever attempt. Nearly 7,000 armored vehicles moved across open ground east of Caen. German defenders, including the elite Panzer Lehr Division, braced behind dug-in guns and Tigers. The battlefield erupted in fire. Hundreds of Shermans burned, black smoke filling the sky. But the sheer weight of Allied armor broke through positions that had withstood weeks of siege. German survivors recalled the sight as overwhelming. Lieutenant Karl Hoffmann of Panzer Lehr later admitted, "We thought them mad to attack with such numbers, yet as our ammunition dwindled, we saw their logic. One line destroyed, another advancing, a wall of steel. We could not stop it." The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 revealed the true scale of American armor. As German armies attempted to retreat east, Shermans blocked every road, firing from hedgerows, villages, and ridgelines. General Paul Hauser of the 7th Army described the encirclement as a furnace of iron. Columns of German vehicles, desperate to escape, were torn apart by Allied artillery and tank fire. Survivors staggered eastward, leaving thousands of wrecks behind. Photographs taken after the battle show roads clogged with smashed trucks, horse-drawn wagons, and burned-out Panthers, all crushed under the treads of advancing Shermans. A French farmer recalled, "The Americans passed with tanks like a river, one after another, endless. The Germans looked at them with eyes of despair." For Wehrmacht commanders, the realization was dawning that this was not a temporary surge, but a permanent condition. In September, as Allied armies swept across France, Shermans spearheaded the drive. From Normandy to the Seine, from Paris to the Belgian frontier, they advanced in waves. German defensive lines crumbled not only from battle losses, but from exhaustion. Soldiers asked their officers how so many tanks could be supplied. The answers were unsatisfying. General Eberbach muttered, "The Americans build more in a month than we in a year. This is the war." The Ardennes offensive in December 1944, Hitler's last gamble, was meant to break the Allied tide. German panzer divisions hurled their remaining strength against thin American lines in the snow. At first, German tanks, especially Panthers and King Tigers, carved through surprised units. Towns like St. Vith and Bastogne became desperate strongholds. But then, from the fog and forests, new Shermans appeared by the hundreds. American commanders shifted entire armored divisions within days, their tanks carried swiftly by endless convoys of trucks and rail cars. At the Battle of Bastogne, when German officers expected to face a crumbling garrison, they instead found armored relief columns smashing through the snow. General von Manteuffel admitted after the war, "We underestimated their mobility. We thought winter would slow them, yet the Americans moved tanks faster than we could move horses." Eyewitness accounts from German soldiers in the Ardennes reveal the psychological toll. One infantryman wrote, "We destroyed a column near Falaise. The next morning another appeared, longer still. It was as if we fought against a machine that never tired, never stopped." For tank crews, the disparity became undeniable. A Tiger might destroy 5 Shermans, but the 6th would kill the Tiger. And when the Tiger was gone, 10 more Shermans remained. The arithmetic was merciless. By early 1945, as the Allies crossed the Rhine, Shermans rolled in numbers that defied belief. Photographs show bridges packed with columns stretching to the horizon. German civilians, watching from ruined villages, were stunned. A young boy in Remagen later recalled, "The road thundered for hours, always more tanks. We had been told the Americans were weak. They looked like giants." Officers at OKW, reading field reports, struggled to find language to describe what their armies faced. General Jodl noted, "Our men report waves of armor without end. They say it is like facing a flood." Captured German diaries testify to despair. Major Kurt Weber wrote in February 1945, "We have no answer. Their tanks come from the air, from the sea, from every road. Each destroyed Sherman is replaced by 5 more. To fight such an enemy is hopeless." Another officer scrawled a single line before surrendering, "We are drowning in Shermans." American records confirm the reality. By VE Day, more than 17,000 Shermans were operating in the European theater. Their presence was so ubiquitous that German soldiers described them as the Green Tide. Even when inferior in armor or firepower, their sheer numbers overwhelmed defenses. The Luftwaffe, crippled and nearly absent, could not stem the flow. German artillery lacked shells. German railways lay shattered, but still the Shermans advanced. German memoirs written after the war often returned to the same image, endless columns of American tanks. General Blumentritt recalled, "It was not their quality that defeated us, but their quantity. They came like waves upon the shore, and we were but stones washed away." Another officer, captured near the Ruhr, told his interrogators, "When I saw their convoys, I knew the war was lost. One could not fight against factories." On the battlefield, the shock was immediate, visceral. In the hedgerows, in the forests, across the plains of France and the Low Countries, Shermans appeared in numbers that made every tactical victory irrelevant. A panther might win a duel, but the battle went to the army that could fight tomorrow and the day after. The Americans could. The Germans could not. By the time the Allies advanced into Germany itself, the sight of Shermans was enough to sap resistance. Villages that might once have fought surrendered at the first rumble of engines. Soldiers who had faced years of combat looked upon the columns and dropped their rifles. One German captain told his men near Cologne, "Do not fire. Look at them. They are too many. We fight in vain." The shock that began on the beaches of Normandy had become a constant drumbeat across Europe. For the German soldier, the Sherman was no longer just a tank. It was a symbol of inevitability, of an enemy that could not be stopped, only delayed. Every burning wreck, every shattered village road told the same story. The Americans had landed not hundreds but thousands, and behind every Sherman destroyed were 1,000 more, waiting on English shores, in American factories, in convoys already crossing the sea. The wall of Shermans was real, and it was closing in from every direction. Spring 1945. The last months of the Reich were a study in contrasts. On the one hand, The propaganda ministry continued to broadcast promises of miracle weapons and final victories. On the other hand, German officers in the field were recording in their diaries the slow, suffocating weight of inevitability. The sight of American Shermans filling the roads from the Rhine to the Elbe erased any illusions left. The tank that German engineers had once mocked as crude and underpowered had become the iron symbol of defeat. The psychological toll was measurable not only in combat results, but in the letters, reports, and confessions of those who fought against it. General Walter Wenck, one of the last commanders to attempt organized resistance on the Western Front, admitted after the war that his men no longer feared tactical defeat. They feared the endless stream of enemy machines. A single Sherman could be destroyed, even 10. But every engagement revealed that behind the first wave came another and another. Wenck remarked bitterly, "You could feel morale collapsing not in battle but in the pauses between battles." A soldier knew that while he rested, the Americans produced another 100 tanks. That sense of futility aided discipline in ways artillery never could. For the German soldier, the Sherman was not only an opponent, but a recurring nightmare. Infantrymen in foxholes described the sound of its engine as the sound of hopelessness. In one letter intercepted by Allied intelligence, a corporal from the 11th Panzer Division wrote to his wife, "When you see one destroyed, you think you have a chance, but then you hear another engine and another, and the horizon is filled with them. It is like drowning, only slower." Such statements reveal that the Sherman's true weapon was not its 75mm gun or its armor plating, but the weight of quantity itself, a psychological pressure that eroded willpower long before a soldier faced the tank in battle. German commanders, schooled in traditions of maneuver and shock, realized that the strategic initiative had shifted permanently. During the Blitzkrieg years, speed and surprise allowed Germany to overwhelm numerically superior foes. Against America, those tactics failed. Speed was answered with faster production. Surprise was answered with deeper reserves. By late 1944, officers no longer planned to win. They planned to delay. The word Verzögerung delay appeared again and again in operational orders. Delay until winter. Delay until new jets arrived. Delay until Hitler's promised Wunderwaffen changed the balance. But every delay was filled not with reprieve, but with more Shermans. General Hasso von Manteuffel later wrote, "We told ourselves that one more offensive would change the war, but in our hearts we knew the war had already been decided in Detroit." The psychological break was most visible in the Ardennes. During the opening days of the offensive, German troops fought with fierce determination. They destroyed hundreds of Shermans in ambushes, in snow-choked forests, in narrow town streets. Propaganda units filmed the burning wrecks to prove that German arms still dominated. Yet within a week, American reinforcements arrived in numbers that made the effort meaningless. Soldiers who had fought bravely began to feel betrayed by reality itself. One captured officer told his interrogators, "When we destroyed them, more appeared. When we destroyed those, still more came. It was as if they were summoned by some machine. We fought not men, but an industry." That phrase, fighting an industry, appears in multiple post-war testimonies. The idea that victory on the battlefield had been made irrelevant by factories thousands of miles away was demoralizing in a way German generals could neither measure nor mend. Among the senior staff, the despair was couched in colder language. Reports to Hitler in February 1945 included not only casualty figures, but production comparisons. One memorandum, later recovered in Berlin, noted that while Germany had produced 6 armored fighting vehicles in 1944, the United States alone had produced over 29,000. The author concluded, "Each month erases our capacity to fight. Our men are brave, our weapons strong, but the mathematics of replacement condemns us." Such words were never meant for public broadcast, but they reflected what commanders already knew. The war was unwinnable, not because German soldiers were unwilling, but because America had transformed war into arithmetic. and arithmetic did not lie. The Sherman became the symbol of this arithmetic. It was not invincible. German crews knew its weaknesses well. They could penetrate its armor, ignite its fuel, ambush its columns. But each tactical success was followed by strategic futility. A Tiger crew might celebrate destroying 5 Shermans, only to face 10 more by afternoon. A Panther division might halt in advance for a day, only to be surrounded the next week by waves of replacements. The cumulative effect was devastating to morale. One officer described it as punching a wall of sandbags. Each blow sinks in, but the wall never falls. As 1945 progressed, German soldiers began to surrender in ever larger groups, often at the mere sight of tanks approaching. Accounts from American units describe villages where defenders fired a few shots before laying down arms as soon as they heard the rumble of engines. An infantryman of the 84th Division recorded, "We did not even fire. We drove our Shermans into the square, and white flags appeared in every window." This collapse of resistance was not simple cowardice, but the product of months of facing a machine that could not be stopped. Surrender became rational, even humane, compared to the hopeless task of fighting the unending columns. The psychological weight reached even Hitler's inner circle. In March 1945, during a conference in the Führer bunker, Albert Speer attempted to explain that Germany could no longer supply the war. Production had fallen under bombing raids, railways were shattered, and the Americans were building more tanks each month than Germany could hope to replace in a year. Hitler raged, dismissing the figures, clinging to fantasies of wonder weapons. But the generals around the table knew Speer was right. They had seen the fields of France filled with American armor, had read reports of entire divisions lost to encirclement by Shermans, had heard their men speak of fighting a steel tide. They sat in silence, aware that the war was no longer about strategy, but about endurance, and that endurance was something Germany had already lost. The collapse of morale was not limited to soldiers. Civilians in Germany, watching the advance, also recognized the inevitability. Refugees trudging eastward saw column after column of American tanks pass on the roads. Many remembered the bombing raids, the firestorms in their cities, the shortages of food and fuel. Now they saw the physical evidence of America's strength rolling past them in steel and smoke. For them, the Sherman was no longer just a tank. It was a reminder that their world was ending and that nothing could stop it. A woman from Cologne later recalled, "When the tanks came, we did not curse them. We looked at them and thought, at last, the war will end." Even German propaganda could not mask the truth. Newspapers filled with stories of heroism, of single Tigers halting entire American battalions. Films showed columns of burning Shermans, narrators declaring that German superiority still ruled the battlefield. Yet soldiers at the front wrote home with a different story. Letters intercepted by Allied censors spoke of despair, of exhaustion, of certainty that defeat was only a matter of time. The contradiction between propaganda and lived reality widened into a gulf that no speech could bridge. When the regime told its people victory was near, the people only looked at the roads filled with Shermans and knew otherwise. The psychological effect of overwhelming numbers is difficult to measure, but historians agree that it shortened the war. A soldier who believes he might win will fight longer than one who knows defeat is certain. By early 1945, the German army was full of soldiers who knew. They had seen the statistics with their own eyes, not in charts but in steel, rolling past in endless convoys. That knowledge eroded resistance faster than bombs or bullets. It turned organized defense into scattered skirmishes, strongholds into surrender. It was not merely that the Sherman destroyed German tanks, it was that the Sherman destroyed German hope. When the war finally ended in May 1945, German officers looked back not only on the battles they had lost, but on the battles they had never truly had a chance to win. In memoirs and testimonies, they returned again and again to the theme of quantity. General Blumentritt wrote, "The Sherman was not a great tank, it was a sufficient tank, and there were always more. It symbolized the industrial power that defeated us. General Bayerlein of Panzerlehr echoed him. The Tiger was stronger, the Panther was swifter, but the Sherman was endless. That was enough. The realization haunted many of them for the rest of their lives, the knowledge that bravery, training, and even tactical brilliance could not outweigh the simple fact of numbers. For America, the Sherman became a symbol of victory. For Germany, it became a symbol of inevitability. Its arrival on the battlefield marked the end of maneuver warfare, the end of blitzkrieg, the end of dreams of domination. The German command, once so confident in its technical superiority, found itself humbled by the relentless mathematics of mass production. The industrial tide had become a psychological tide, drowning not only armies but an entire ideology in the process. The final irony was that the Sherman's greatest victory was not mechanical but mental. It won not only by breaking through defenses, but by breaking the will to resist. German soldiers who once believed themselves invincible came to see the tank with the white star as an omen of defeat. Each new sighting reminded them that America's factories never slept, that for every Sherman burning on the battlefield, 100 more waited behind it. In that knowledge lay the collapse of morale, the surrender of armies, and the end of a war that had begun with such arrogance. The Sherman did not just fight battles, it fought hope itself, and it won.